Welcome back to Fox 5's On the Hill Live this Sunday morning. You know, the case of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein still not going away. This past week, Deputy Attorney General interviewed Epstein's longtime girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving 20 years in prison for her role in the sex trafficking case. Now, reports are that she received limited immunity before that interview. And for more on this and other big news of the week, I want to bring in our panel this morning. Joey Garrison is the White House reporter for USA Today, and Mia McCarthy covers Congress for Politico. So, $64,000 question, to date myself with a game show that doesn't exist anymore. Mia, why are people still talking about this?
I think a lot of Republicans are very worried about this because they're hearing from their constituents a lot of concern over this. Trump ran on really trying to release, put more transparency, release the Epstein files. It was something that he talked about all the time on his campaign. And so now we're seeing his base really get riled up over the fact that this is something that has not happened yet and that he's, backtracking that a little bit. And so I think a lot of House Republicans especially are getting very concerned because they're getting a lot of phone calls from constituents who want to see this released.
Joey, you cover the White House. You're in those briefings. This is a constant subject now in those briefings. The White House has been able to talk to its followers in the past about issues and then have those followers follow. Why is that not happening?
Well, the response has been really sporadic. You recall at the beginning, President Trump started likening this to the Russian hoax and the Steele dossier, other things in the past that he felt were wrongly threatening himself. And then he said, you can release the credible information from the Epstein files. And he had denied, of course, any wrongdoing. We find out that his name is mentioned this past week in the Epstein files. And so we're, sort of finding out more as we go here. And the White House didn't have a real clear message on the get-go of this, and that's why this is, still going on.
Mia, Congress left town early over this because Speaker Johnson said he wanted to be able to prevent any moves that either Democrats or even some Republicans made. How big of an impact is that a story like this actually affects the congressional calendar and they leave town early?
Yeah, so they left early one day, so Republicans will argue that that's not a huge impact. But what it did impact was some of the stuff that they were supposed to vote on throughout that week that was going to keep them in town until Thursday. We're seeing a lot of immigration bills that were on the docket for that week. Those things get stalled because of procedural measures that Democrats are using to force votes on releasing the Epstein files. Democrats are really capitalizing on this, and they are trying to, put Republicans in an uncomfortable spot in a time when Democrats have really little leverage on the House floor.
Last point on this before we move on. Joey, Todd Blanche, who people may remember from, Donald Trump's own personal proceedings in court, is now a deputy U.S. attorney, attorney general. He had these meetings with Maxwell himself. Does the White House feel that this will be enough to satisfy the questions about this? Or is this opening up a whole new Pandora's box for them?
I don't think it's going to be enough to satisfy all the concerns out there or the criticism from Democrats. And you mentioned Todd Blanche used to be the personal attorney for President Trump. He went down to the jails in Tallahassee, Florida, spoke to or met with Maxwell for 2 days. The attorney for Maxwell came out saying that they, talked about 100 different individuals. It was unclear whether Trump was one of those. But I think from Democrats, they're going to, point to the past associations between Trump and Blanche, casting doubt on whether the testimony from Maxwell could be taken seriously, especially while she is admittedly from her attorney seeking a pardon right now.
All right, let's move on. Talk about tariffs. There's that old adage that you rip a Band-Aid off quickly. If the impact from these tariffs continues to push into the fall and into the congressional elections of 2026, how concerned are Republicans right now that if there is a backlash against the tariffs, it could push back on them as far as control of the House.
Right now, Republicans, they are being very bullish. They are projecting confidence in this and that this is going to return, bring people money back to them. This is going to help the economy. This is going to grow that. Democrats, meanwhile, are planning to really capitalize on this is not going to help us in the long term. And I think based on when we see those effects, that's going to really, show an effect in the upcoming midterm elections.
Joey, there's a lot riding on these things that the White House has done. There's also this, open question about whether or not there were going to be 90-day deals in 90 days.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. Are they getting the return on this that they thought they were going to be getting? Because they have been announcing some deals,
yeah,
but not a lot of deals.
The White House last week announced a deal with Japan, although based on what you're hearing from Japan, it's unclear exactly how many of these items they agreed on. But yeah, there's an August 1st new deadline. This was pushed back from a couple weeks ago, in which new tariff rates on countries across the world are going to go into effect. But the question is, will there be eventually an inflationary impact on this to consumers? We saw in the Consumer Price Index report for June the first rise in inflation in several months. I asked President Trump himself, do you think this is a result of your tariffs? He really pushed back on that. But if you start getting a couple months of that, we're going to, I think a new narrative on these tariffs could be taking hold that, hey, this is affecting your pocket.
And obviously the economy, inflation, one of the big things President won this election on, hammering through that last September. I want to talk about the Fed chair, because there was this wild scene over the Federal Reserve building, which is under reconstruction right now, between Jerome Powell and the president, really kind of going back and forth about it, bickering a little bit. What do Republicans on the Hill think about keeping Powell or letting him go, as the president indicates that he probably wants to do at some point?
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting because, a lot of Republican congressional leaders don't necessarily want to break with the president on this, but they also understand that there could be economic impacts of a firing of the Fed chair. Also, not to mention the legality of it. A lot of, we saw Thune and Johnson this week questioning if that is even possible. So I think, a lot of Republicans are holding back a little bit as opposed, in regards to saying that he should be fired. They're saying his term is up soon, and I think they're waiting on that as opposed to outwardly saying he should do this or shouldn't. The
markets haven't liked a lot of this talk, Joey. Is the president serious about this, or is it the thing he kind of does with jostle with people and kind of later on claim victory that the other person is corrected their ways?
So that scene was pretty extraordinary. Both Powell and Trump wearing hard hats. Before the touring, the renovation. Powell actually tries to correct Trump on the exact cost of the budget overruns that Trump has suggested could be grounds for firing Powell. But what was interesting is coming out of that, Trump was actually said, I don't think this really warrants terminating him, and seemed to kind of slam the door on it. Of course, Powell's term as chairman ends in May of 2026, so it seems like Trump was just going to try to run out the clock.